At a girls' night out in Los Angeles at age 27, I looked around at the gorgeous, aspiring actresses holding their glasses of wine perfectly casually in one hand and thought, I would totally give this up to have a baby. As a young woman, I had put all of my energy into my career, but it was a relief to imagine a life beyond Hollywood. I was dating an older man. Our sex life was pitiful, and he had just been fired from his own company. Somehow, I convinced myself that this new age environmentalist with a ponytail was the ideal father of my children. We married and moved to Dallas, my hometown, where I'd hoped we'd build a happy family life. But troubling dreams and doubts I could not explain led me to see a therapist who happened to be blind. She didn't need eyesight to look into my subconscious and tell me I was dissatisfied. I knew I had married the wrong man. About 6 months after the divorce, I ran into a guy I'd known since I'd held him in my arms as an infant. His parents, friends of my parents, say I was the first little girl he ever met. 3 years younger and a fellow Dallasite who'd also left to make his mark on New York and Los Angeles, he was my match made in heaven. As we fell in love, I shared with him my desire for creating a family. We married a year and a half later, quickly found conceiving to be fun and easy. Pregnant at last, I started falling asleep on the couch and had to eat all the time. The hormonally induced mood swings challenged us both. When I was ravenous, I made him drive like a monster on fire to the nearest Tex-Mex. But we were giddy learning about how this little lentil, this tiny grape, would grow and develop. We had our first real secret as a couple. We affectionately called the baby Tutu. As my belly rounded into a bump, the anxious thoughts I'd had all my life about what I need to do and when were replaced with a sense of peace and purpose. One afternoon, I took my little orange Pomeranian on a walk around our beautiful Lakewood neighborhood. I connected with a magical feeling of purpose, carrying that little bun in my oven. I envisioned pushing Tutu in a stroller and looking into the eyes of a mini me and my husband. The 20-week sonogram revealed that Tutu was a boy, but the technician also said that some of his measurements were off. We needed to go in for a higher level sonogram. The next afternoon at the maternal fetal specialist, I felt strangely calm. Huddled around a monitor in a dark room, my husband and I looked at the tiny boy dancing in my womb. He appeared happy-go-lucky, kicking and moving his mouth. But the doctor said, there is a constellation of markers here. The femurs are short, the bowels look bright, but most concerning is that it appears that the rear part of the cerebellum is not there. She recommended that we have an amniocentesis to learn the cause of the abnormalities. She then brought up the possibility of terminating the pregnancy. The bottom fell out of my stomach. She patted my hand, then left us alone. My husband said, I don't want to bring a child into this world who doesn't have the health to live a happy life. I nodded. We were trembling at the severity of the situation, but at least we were on the same page. We had planned to visit LA that weekend to share our happy news, but we canceled the trip and went in for the amnio. The results would take 10 days, an eternity of waiting. We talked through every potentiality. I was so visibly pregnant that I'd attract well-wishers anywhere I went, so I stopped leaving the house. I did keep some form of routine, teaching Pilates out of a small studio in our home every morning. My sweet clients were innocently asking about the baby we just learned was a boy, while I agonized over the looming reality of losing him before he was born. Friends from LA didn't understand why I had canceled our trip. Lying to them was excruciating, but telling the truth would have meant facing it, and I couldn't yet. Then we got wind of what was coming to a boil in the Texas Senate. 40 years after Roe versus Wade, a proposed new bill would ban abortion after 6 weeks. Because our doctors couldn't identify definitively whether the condition of our fetus was fatal, we didn't have the option of having the termination done in a hospital. If that was the choice we made, we'd have to go to an abortion clinic. The amnio indicated our baby didn't have Down syndrome or any other chromosomal abnormality. My brother, a doctor, prepared me. You may not find out what is causing the baby's issues, and you may have to make a decision about his life without all the information. So I steeled myself and started researching the abortion clinic. I set up an initial consultation for June 25th, 2013. Before going to the appointment, I clicked on Senator Wendy Davis's filibuster via live streaming. It took my breath away to hear her describe our exact situation. She looked so confident and professional that I relaxed a little, grateful she was doing everything she could to protect my rights. The clinic waiting room felt like the DMV, people from all walks of life coming together for only this common goal. I wondered about each woman, each couple. I was the only person there whose pregnancy showed. I turned my eyes down, covered my belly, and tried to slow my breathing. I was pissed. The first time I'd ever been pregnant, happily married, and wanting a baby, yet sitting in an abortion clinic. The next day, I underwent the final test, an MRI of my pelvis. 30 minutes felt like forever while I tried zoning out the ludicrously loud noises and the frightening sensation of being encased in a massive metal tomb. All 4 of our parents stood with us as we learned that there was now an alarming amount of fluid trapped in Tutu's brain and lungs. The doctor told us that the MRI indicated his entire brain was abnormal. She couldn't tell us why or how long he would live, only that if he survived birth, he would have many serious problems. With heavy hearts, my husband and I decided that it was best for Tutu to proceed with the abortion. We had held out as long as we could, awaiting a miracle, but I refused to allow my tiny son to slowly drown in my womb. The last night with him was somber. My husband took a final photo of me, smiling through tears as I rubbed my pregnant belly. I didn't want Tutu to be scared, but I was. At the clinic surgical center, the doctor inserted some seaweed into me to open up my cervix. That night, my water broke at home. Things became very real very quickly as I pulled on Depends to try to catch the absurd flow that poured out of me. The next morning, the doctor gave Tutu a shot that stopped his heart. Thanks to the great care and medications I received, I did not feel pain, and I assumed that Tutu didn't either. My husband made arrangements to have his body cremated. We registered his name on the death certificate as Tutankhamun, after the great Egyptian pharaoh who lives on in the afterlife. A few days later, tired of feeling isolated, I sent an email to everyone we knew. I was afraid some people wouldn't understand or support our decision, but the outpouring of love we received was awesome. So many friends and family members had lost pregnancies for different reasons. Some close friends confided that they had had abortions or also dealt with fetal abnormalities. Why was this something that no one was talking about? The grieving process has been messy. It took me weeks to show my face at the grocery store. Navigating life out in public where I could run into someone who hadn't gotten the update made me feel like an alien in hiding. Physically, I dealt with cramping and bleeding for 6 weeks. Some baby weight fell off immediately, but most of it clung to my small frame. It was humiliating to put on maternity clothes, but my regular clothes didn't fit. A former anorexic, I had to keep reminding myself that the changes in my body are just the beginning of sacrifices I'll have to make as a mother. My husband has been an incredible cheerleader. We are not victims, he drilled into me. No, this isn't fair, but we are not exempt from the tough parts of life. We will have the family we want. And he's right. Every doctor assured us that they'd never seen this happen to the same couple twice. So my dream of becoming a mother is still intact. On the detour, I've become more aware of the potential complications of pregnancy and more compassionate to families with special needs kids. I've spent many hours locked in gut-wrenching sobs, missing Tutu and feeling sorry for myself. I probably spend too much time rocking and burping my dog. But I know I'm lucky. Despite Wendy Davis's valiant effort, if I were going through the same experience now, I'd have to make arrangements to have abortion in another state. The way I see it, Wendy stood up and spoke for me. The least I can do is stand here and tell you my story. Someday, when my kids are old enough to understand, we will tell them about their big brother Tutu, watching over all of us from above.
I was on a panel of clergy leaders at Planned Parenthood's National Convention, and I was listening to women talk about the stigma of abortion in our society. As I prepared to speak about clergy roles in that movement, someone said, "Men have abortion stories also." Like a hammer, it hit me. No one knows mine. My story starts in the lunchroom at Thomas Jefferson Junior High School in Teaneck, New Jersey. Carmen was a dynamic dancer, and taken by her Dominican charm, I asked her out. What we didn't know then was that we'd be together through junior and senior high school. And as teens, we followed our hormones to secret trysts, to make-out sessions under the school staircases, and when our parents weren't home. We started having sex early on and found comfort in our amateur explorations. And we were careful. You see, I knew something about sex because I learned it in church. School health class was awkward and limited, but my Unitarian church, the church of my upbringing, and that About Your Sexuality class offered models of diaphragms and condoms on bananas and how-to slides of every position you've ever heard of, and some I'm sure you haven't heard of. The theory was and is that the more you know, the better decision you make. And then the AIDS crisis hit, and gay and straight kids alike were afraid, but I didn't have to worry much with one partner. And by the time Carmen and I graduated college and moved in to a cabin in the woods in Vermont, it felt like we had been married for 40 years. I loved living there with her, hiking out the back door, chopping wood for the stove, listening to the quiet snow fall on pines. But I was just 23, and the relationship was stifling. And then there was Masha, a friend I had met in Chinese philosophy class in college. She could light up a room or stand on a table in a bar and get everyone in on the toast. Having grown up in Tehran under the Ayatollah, she was a refugee in America, and she was ready to be free, a rebel without a cause. One night when Carmen was out of town, Masha and I found ourselves in an awkward situation. The urge of attraction took hold, and I knew she was the fuse I needed to blow up things with Carmen. As we drove back to her apartment that night, we ran into a friend. My friend asked, "Daniel, what are you doing?" And I said, "I don't know," but I knew. And a week later, I told Carmen I was leaving, and Masha and I moved into an apartment in the city. And we hiked in the Adirondacks and made love under waterfalls and pushed all kinds of limits. And we built up dreams of doing great things. And then I started to explore theology. And as Masha looked at the seminary brochure, she said to me, "I'm not going to be a minister's wife." And the next day, she walked in the door of the apartment and said to me, "And I'm pregnant." Any sense of wild abandon was replaced by the seriousness of those words. And when I came up for a breath from the shock of hearing her say it, I didn't know what to do. I experienced that fast-forward movement, that moment in your mind when you can pass through years, and I imagined a baby and a child taking its first steps and a boy throwing a ball in the yard and high school graduation and so on. And then I snapped back to the apartment, and the two of us bewildered, and I knew neither of us were in the position to have a child. I was a teacher with no clear future, and she was working in a print shop at night. It would have to end some way. And she needed to make that decision, and that decision would change us both. Terror and shame took over my days. How could I be so careless? Who could I talk to? There was no one I felt I could turn to, not my family, not my friends, and she shut down every attempt to discuss it. And after a few weeks, she walked into the apartment and said, "It's over." And I put down the tea kettle and said, "What is over?" And she said, "I took care of it." She told me she had gone with some friends to a midwife who had dilated her and removed the fetus, and she was tired. And she pushed by me for the bedroom, her spirit about as low as I'd ever seen, and I made tea. And we sat in silence a long time, and I said, "I love you," and we went to bed. And that night, I got up and sat in the kitchen, relieved to feel disposed of those tormenting fantasies about the potential future, and angry that I had been left out of the conversation completely, and relieved for Masha and for us. And I also felt despair for her body, her spirit, and that we had let each other down and didn't know what to do with any of it, including our love. So we made plans for the future that we both knew wouldn't work out. She went home to Tehran to her grandmother, and I deferred seminary and suffered in the deep Vermont winter. And in the spring, I knew I needed to rebuild my life, and I went home to New Jersey to ground myself and find my way again. And there was my brother, who was a good friend to me in that time. He knew I needed friends and introduced me one night to one of his classmates at his art graduate program in New York City. Her name was Marianne. And that night at some restaurant over tapas and sangria, Marianne asked me about my plans, and I said I was going to seminary to be a Unitarian minister, and she sheepishly asked, "Are Unitarian ministers celibate?" And a year later, we moved to Berkeley, and 2 years later, we would be married. And 7 years later, we'd be parents of a 1-year-old moving to Dallas, Texas to serve this church. Now I'm your minister, and I volunteer as a chaplain at an abortion clinic here in Dallas. And I spend time with women who we take to New Mexico to get safe and legal abortions. And I've worked with these women and their families who are struggling with the stigma of their decision to end the pregnancy, and I have heard their questions about being judged by God or punished for their actions, and I have talked to them about a God who loves them no matter what, and who wants them to live fully and to know their life purpose. And I have heard stories of mistakes and screwed up relationships resulting in abortion, and I have received them having been there myself. And in receiving and sharing these stories, I think we are both healed. And I feel like I'm there to remind the women that they have dignity that doesn't go away because they have an abortion. And I have been there for the men who sit silently in the waiting room and feel sidelined, encouraging them that they have a role and a story. And every day I do this, I am reminded of the fragile moments that I have lived through and the support that I have received and can give. And I remember those broken dreams and those tender moments of love and affection that surrounded me in a time of wild abandon, and those decisions that took integrity and courage. And I know that we are all on adventures. We all make mistakes. We all do things we don't intend. We all get on wild rides with people we never expected and end up in complex moments that will change us. And the thing is that with a little courage and encouragement, we can speak our truths and have them be received and have them be healing and wholeness. Part of becoming a minister for me was to heal from that intense betrayal I caused Carmen and that wild roller coaster of Masha and the abortion and our demise. And I know that someday that I knew that someday that my abortion would emerge, that this story, which remained in the silent sanctuary inside me for decades, in a place of powerlessness and pain and confusion, could have a place where it can make a difference. So when that hammer hit me, men have abortion stories also, I realized I had to tell mine. And so I'm not ashamed to say to you today that I'm your minister, and I got someone pregnant who had an abortion, and I'm better now that you have heard my story.